If someone had told me 3 months ago that my entire world would be dismantled and rebuilt by a random partner assignment in advanced physics, I would have laughed. Or, more likely, I would have just stared at them blankly, too socially anxious to even muster a laugh. My world was small, and I liked it that way. It was a fortress built of books, equations, and the quiet, predictable rhythm of my own solitude. And from the battlements of that fortress, I watched him. Caleb. Caleb Thorne was not a part of my world. He was a natural disaster in human form. A supernova of charisma and casual confidence that a quiet, orbiting moon, could only observe from a safe and sterile distance. He was the captain of the soccer team, the center of every laughing crowd in the hallway, the kind of guy who seemed to move through life on a current of effortless grace. He was loud. His laughter boomed, a physical thing that took up space. He was big, a solid wall of muscle and bone that always seemed to be in motion, leaning against lockers, throwing a football in the quad, clapping someone on the back. To me, he was less a person and more a collection of impossibly vivid sensory data. The scent of grass and some sharp, clean soap that followed him. The deep timbre of his voice. The way sunlight caught in the tips of his brown hair, turning them gold. I cataloged these details like a scientist observing a foreign species. It was a detached, academic exercise, or so I told myself. It was a way to process his existence without having to confront the frantic, trapped bird feeling his presence gave me. My heart had a tendency to betray me, to beat a frantic, stupid rhythm against my ribs whenever he was near. It was inconvenient. It was illogical. Our worlds were separated by an unbridgeable gulf. The jocks and the nerds. The seen and the unseen. He lived in the bright, noisy center of our high school universe, and I existed in the quiet, dusty archives of the library, in the back corner of the chemistry lab. He probably didn't even know my name. Thou, just another pale face in a sea of them. And that was fine. It was safe. Safe was the foundation upon which I had built my life. Safe was predictable. Safe was solitary. I didn't want the risk that came with being seen, the messy, terrifying vulnerability of connection. I just wanted to get through senior year, get into a good university, and continue my life of quiet, orderly observation. Then came Mr. Harrison, a man whose passion for physics was matched only by his misguided belief in the character-building power of forced social interaction. He stood at the front of the classroom, a benevolent tyrant in a tweed jacket, holding a fishbowl full of folded paper slips. "For your final project," he announced, a gleam in his eye that I immediately distrusted, "the trebuchet, you will not be choosing your own partners." A collective groan rippled through the classroom. My stomach filled with a familiar swarm of bees. I hated group projects. They were an exercise in managing other people's apathy, in doing all the work myself while someone else attached their name to it. Instead, he continued, shaking the fishbowl with theatrical flair, "We're going to let fate decide. I will draw one name, and that person will come up and draw the name of their partner." My hands grew damp. I sank a little lower in my seat, trying to become invisible. "Just don't be me. Please, don't be me. Let me get someone competent, someone quiet, someone like Sarah from my calculus class, who was meticulous and reliable." Mr. Harrison plunged his hand into the bowl. "First up, Leo Vance." My name hit the air and hung there, a spotlight pinning me to my chair. My blood ran cold. Every head in the room turned to look at me, the quiet kid in the back corner. I felt a hot flush creep up my neck. I forced my legs to move, my feet feeling like lead blocks as I walked the long, lonely path to the front of the classroom. I could feel Caleb's eyes on me. I didn't have to look to know. His presence had a gravitational pull. I kept my gaze fixed on the fishbowl, a fragile glass, orb containing my doom. "Go on, Leo," Mr. Harrison prompted gently. "Pick your fate." My hand trembled as I reached in. The folded papers felt slick and menacing. I grabbed one, my fingers fumbling. I pulled it out, my heart hammering a frantic S. Oh, S against my sternum. I unfolded it slowly, delaying the inevitable. And there it was, in black ink. 2 words that felt like a death sentence. Caleb Thorne. I heard a low whistle from somewhere in the classroom. I risked a glance. Caleb was leaning back in his chair, a look of profound, weary annoyance on his face. He caught my eye for a fraction of a second, and in that moment, I saw my own dread mirrored back at me. He was just as horrified as I was. The fortress had been breached. The natural disaster was heading directly for my small, quiet world, and there was absolutely nothing I could do to stop it. Our first meeting was a study in mutual discomfort. We met in the library, a neutral territory that felt anything, but I had arrived 15 minutes early, my schematics and calculations spread out neatly on the table. He arrived 5 minutes late, smelling of cut grass and sweat, his gym bag slung over his shoulder. He dropped into the chair opposite me, and the force of it made the table shudder. "All right, Vance," he said, his voice a low rumble that felt too loud for the library's sacred silence. "Let's get this over with." He didn't mean it to be cruel. It was just a statement of fact. This was an obligation, a chore. For him, I was an obstacle between him and the end of the semester. For me, he was a terrifying, unpredictable variable thrown into the carefully balanced equation of my life. "I've, run some preliminary calculations," I stammered, pushing a sheet of paper across the table. My voice sounded thin and reedy. He glanced at the page, his brow furrowing. It was covered in my cramped, precise handwriting, a forest of numbers and symbols. He looked at it for a moment, then back at me. His expression was completely blank. "Right?" he said, the single word conveying a universe of incomprehension. "Look, you do that stuff. The math. I'll handle the building. I'm good with my hands." He spread his own hands on the table, and I couldn't help but stare. They were large, the knuckles calloused, the nails short and clean. They were hands that knew how to work, how to create and control. My own hands, resting in my lap, looked pale and useless in comparison. "We need to work on my house," I said, forcing the words out. "My dad, he left a lot of tools in the garage. A saw, drills, everything we'll need." Caleb nodded, his gaze already drifting towards the window, towards the freedom of the soccer field. "Cool. When?" And so it began. The forced proximity. He started coming over after his practice. He would show up at my door, a looming presence on my quiet front porch, his hair still damp from the showers, his gym bag smelling of exertion and soap. He would stalk through my silent house, which seemed to shrink around his large frame, and into the garage. The garage was my sanctuary. It was dusty and smelled of motor oil and sawdust, a comforting, masculine scent left behind by my father. It was where I came to think, to tinker. Now it was our shared space. His loud energy filled every corner, displacing the quiet I was used to. He'd toss his bag in a corner, turn on the radio to some loud, thumping rock station, and the invasion would be complete. At first, we worked in a tense, almost complete silence, punctuated only by the whine of the circular saw or the rhythmic rasp of sandpaper on wood. I would point to a diagram, and he would grunt in acknowledgement. He would hold up a piece of wood, and I would nod. It was a miserable, awkward pantomime. But slowly, things started to shift. I started to see him. Not the popular jock, the hallway god, but the person underneath. I saw the intense focus in his eyes when he measured a piece of lumber, his tongue caught between his teeth in concentration. He moved with an economy and precision that was beautiful to watch. He wasn't following my plans blindly. He had an intuitive understanding of physics, of leverage and force that came from his body, not from a book. I noticed the small things. A faint, silvery scar that cut through his left eyebrow. The way he'd rub the back of his neck when he was tired. A gesture of profound weariness that seemed at odds with his boisterous public persona. I saw the faint shadows under his eyes that told me he wasn't sleeping enough, stretched thin between school, practice, and the crushing weight of expectation I was only just beginning to understand. He was surprisingly kind in his own gruff way. One afternoon, I was struggling to hold a heavy piece of the trebuchet's arm in place while trying to tighten a bolt. My arms were shaking with the strain, the wood digging into my shoulder. "Here, let me," he said, his voice suddenly close. He moved behind me, his body a wall of warmth, and took the weight of the wood. His chest brushed against my back. My breath hitched in my throat. I could feel the heat of him, smell the faint, clean scent of his skin. The world narrowed to that single point of contact. "Got it?" he asked, his voice a low vibration against my shoulder blade. I couldn't speak. I just nodded, my fingers fumbling with a wrench. My mind was a blank slate, wiped clean by his proximity. He held the wood steady, his presence a solid, reassuring weight behind me, until the bolt was tight. When he stepped back, I felt a sudden, sharp sense of loss, of cold air rushing into the space he had occupied. The real thaw came during a moment of accidental contact. We were both on the floor, working on the base of the machine. I was holding a part steady while he drove in a screw with a power drill. He finished setting the drill down, and we both reached for the same drop washer at the same time. His fingers brushed against mine. It wasn't much, a fleeting, feather-light touch of skin against skin. But for me, it was a lightning strike. A jolt of pure, unadulterated electricity shot up my arm, short-circuiting my entire nervous system. My heart kicked into a frantic, panicked rhythm. Heat bloomed in my chest and spread through my limbs, a wildfire sensation. He pulled his hand back instantly, as if he'd been burned. "Sorry," he mumbled, not looking at me. "It's fine." I managed to squeak, my voice an octave too high. But it wasn't fine. The air in the garage was suddenly thick, charged with a new, unspoken tension. The space between us, once a comfortable buffer, was now a humming, vibrant void. I could feel the ghost of his touch on my skin for the rest of the day, a tingling brand that marked a definitive before and after. The power dynamic began to shift in a way I never expected. As the trebuchet grew more complex, so did the physics behind it. We were calibrating the counterweight, and something was off. Our test firings were wildly inconsistent. Caleb stood back, running a frustrated hand through his hair. He kicked at a stray block of wood. "I don't get it. The arm is solid. The base is level. Why isn't it working?" This was my territory. The numbers, the theory. I stepped forward, my own confidence surging for the first time. "It's the release angle," I said, pointing at the sling. "And the counterweight ratio is wrong. We have too much mass for this length of arm. It's creating oscillation." He turned to look at me, his frustration giving way to a grudging respect. It was the first time he had looked at me as an equal, as someone who had something he needed. "Okay, Professor," he said, a hint of a smile touching his lips. It was the first time he had smiled at me. A real smile, not a smirk. It transformed his whole face, softening the sharp angles. "Explain it to me." Like I'm 5-inch, and so I did. I grabbed a piece of scrap wood and a pencil and sketched out the equations, the force vectors, the parabolic arcs. I talked about torque and potential energy. And he listened. He actually listened, asking smart questions, his eyes fixed on my sketch, his brow furrowed in that way I was starting to find incredibly endearing. In that moment, I wasn't the scared, invisible kid anymore. I was the expert. I had the knowledge. And he, the golden boy, the king of the school, was looking at me for answers. The ground beneath my feet felt a little more solid. The fortress walls were starting to crumble, not from an attack, but because I was tentatively, terrifyingly, starting to lower the drawbridge myself. The night before the project was due, the sky broke open. A storm had been threatening all day, the air thick and heavy with a metallic tang. Now, it arrived with a vengeance. Rain hammered against the garage roof like 1,000 frantic drums. Wind howled around the corners of the house, rattling the windows. We were working late, putting the finishing touches on the trebuchet. A coat of sealant, tightening the last of the bolts. The radio was drowned out by the roar of the storm. We had a shout to be heard over it. "This is insane," Caleb yelled, wiping sweat and sawdust from his forehead with the back of his hand. "We're almost done," I shouted back, my voice thin against the gale. And then, with a sudden, deafening crack of thunder that shook the entire garage, the lights flickered once, twice, and died. We were plunged into absolute, pitch-black darkness. The only sound was the storm and our own ragged breathing. "Great!" Caleb's voice came out of the dark, startlingly close. "Just perfect!" My heart was pounding. A mixture of fear from the storm and a different, more potent kind of fear born of his proximity in the suffocating darkness. My phone. I mumbled, fumbling in my pocket. I can use the flashlight. My trembling fingers found the phone. I switched on the light, and the narrow beam cut a small, trembling circle in the oppressive black. It illuminated his face first. He was standing only a few feet away, his eyes wide, his expression unreadable in the stark, dancing light. The beam caught the rain plastering his hair to his forehead, the sheen of moisture on his skin. The garage, once so familiar, was transformed. It was no longer a workshop. It was a cave, an isolated island in a sea of roaring chaos. The world outside ceased to exist. There was only the storm, the darkness, and the two of us trapped in this small bubble of light. "Well," he said, his voice softer now, almost a murmur. "Looks like we're stuck here for a while." The power was out in the whole neighborhood. My phone had a low battery. There was nothing to do but wait. We sat on an old, dusty tarp spread on the concrete floor, the single beam of my phone's flashlight aimed at the ceiling, casting a weak, diffuse glow over the small space. The silence between us was different now. It wasn't awkward. It was heavy, full of unspoken things. The storm provided a constant, churning soundtrack, a wild percussion that seemed to mirror the turmoil inside my own chest. "You know," Caleb said, his voice quiet, breaking the spell. "I thought this was going to be the worst project ever." I looked at him. In the dim light, the sharp edges of his confidence seemed to have softened. He looked younger, more vulnerable. "Me too," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. He let out a short, humorless laugh. "I'm a jerk. I know what people think of me. Well, you probably thought of me." I didn't say anything. I just watched his face, the play of shadows across his features. "My dad," he started, then stopped. He picked at a loose thread on his jeans. "He's intense. Everything is about the scholarship. Get the scholarship, get into a good school, play soccer. It's the only thing he talks about. It's like if I'm not that, I'm nothing." He finally looked at me, his eyes searching mine in the gloom. "Everyone thinks I have it all figured out. This perfect life. It's all a lie. I spend most of my time just trying not to drown." His confession hung in the air between us, raw and startlingly honest. It was a piece of himself he had offered up, a crack in the armor he showed the world. And in that moment, all my fear of him, my intimidation, it all just evaporated. He wasn't a god. He was just a boy, buckling under a weight I couldn't imagine. My own walls, already weakened, crumbled to dust. "I've always been scared of you," I heard myself say. The words came out before I could stop them, a truth so deeply buried I hadn't even known I was ready to speak it. He frowned, a genuine confusion on his face. "Scared? Of me? Why?" How could I explain it? The way his presence filled a room, the way his confidence felt like a judgment on my own lack of it. "You're just a lot," I said, the words feeling clumsy and inadequate. "You're so alive, and everyone sees you." I'm used to not being seen. He was quiet for a long time, just watching me. The only sounds were the rain and the frantic beating of my own heart. He shifted, moving a little closer on the tarp. Our knees brushed. The contact was electric, a silent explosion in the dark. Neither of us moved away. "I see you, Leo," he said, his voice a low, rough whisper that seemed to vibrate right through me. My breath caught. He said my name. He saw me. He reached out, his movements slow, hesitant. His fingers touched my cheek, his thumb gently stroking my jawline. His hand was warm and slightly rough from the woodworking, and the touch was the most terrifying, most wonderful thing I had ever felt. My entire body went rigid. I couldn't breathe. I could only feel the press of his skin against mine. "Is this okay?" he whispered, his face so close now I could feel his breath on my lips. I couldn't find my voice. I just gave a small, jerky nod. It was all I could manage. And then he leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't like the kisses in movies. There was no soaring music, no fireworks. It was slow and hesitant and deeply uncertain. His lips were soft, questioning. It was a question, not a statement. "Are you sure?" It was a kiss that tasted of rain and sawdust, and a vulnerability so profound it made my chest ache. I leaned into it, a silent answer. My hand came up to rest on his chest, over his heart, which was hammering just as fast as my own. The kiss deepened, became more sure. It was a discovery, a mapping of new territory in the dark. It was the collapsing of two separate worlds into a single, shared point of contact. In the darkness of my father's garage, with a storm raging around us, I was no longer observing. I was a part of it, and it was the most real thing that had ever happened to me. I woke to the sound of birds. Chirping, annoyingly cheerful birds. Sunlight, harsh and unforgiving, streamed through the high, dusty windows of the garage. The storm was over. The world had returned to its normal, brightly lit state. My neck was stiff. I had fallen asleep, slumped against a pile of old blankets, my phone lying dead on the floor beside me. For a blissful, groggy second, I couldn't remember why I was in the garage. That all came flooding back. The darkness, the rain, Caleb, the kiss. My eyes flew open. I sat up, my heart starting its familiar, panicked gallop. I was alone. The garage door was slightly ajar, a stripe of bright morning cutting across the concrete floor. The trebuchet stood in the center of the room, finished, a monument to the last few weeks. But of Caleb, there was no sign. A cold dread, heavy and sickening, pooled in my stomach. He was gone. He had left without a word. I scrambled to my feet, my muscles aching in protest. I rushed into the house. It was silent, empty. A quick check of the driveway confirmed it. His truck was gone. He left. The thought ricocheted around the inside of my skull. He woke up in the harsh light of day, saw me, and regretted everything. He ran. The kiss, the confession, the shared vulnerability in the dark. It was all a mistake, an anomaly brought on by the storm, a moment of madness. I sank onto a kitchen chair, my head in my hands. My mind, my greatest asset, turned on me. It became a torture chamber, replaying every moment from the night before, twisting it, analyzing it, finding all the ways I had been a fool. He was just tired, confused. It didn't mean anything. He was probably laughing about it with his friends right now. You're so stupid, Leo. So naive. Why would someone like him ever want someone like you? The self-recrimination was a physical thing, a nausea that churned in my gut. The quiet solitude of my house, once a comfort, now felt like a prison. It was no longer peaceful. It was just empty. His absence was a tangible presence, a gaping hole in the fabric of the morning. I could still smell the faint scent of him, of his soap in the rain, a ghost in the air. Somehow I got us to school. We loaded the trebuchet into his truck. He had returned just for that. Our interaction clipped and brutally efficient, our eyes refusing to meet. The silence was a physical weight, pressing the air out of my lungs. Every wordless glance was an accusation. We set up the project in the school gym with the other groups, moving like strangers, like two people who had never shared a single honest word, let alone a kiss. The presentation was a blur. I spoke about the physics, my voice a monotone, my eyes fixed on a point on the far wall. Caleb demonstrated the firing mechanism, his movements stiff and mechanical. We got a perfect score. Mr. Harrison was ecstatic. He clapped us both on the shoulder, congratulating us on our excellent collaboration. The irony was a bitter pill in my throat. The rest of the day was agony. I saw him in the hallway, surrounded by his friends, laughing at some joke. He looked over, his eyes met mine for a fleeting, terrible second, and then he looked away. Nothing. No acknowledgement. No sign that last night had ever happened. It was worse than before. Before, I had been invisible. Now I was seen and discarded. The gulf between our worlds, which had seemed to vanish in the dark, had returned, wider and more impassable than ever. I had lowered the drawbridge, and he had ridden out, leaving my fortress in ruins. The silence stretched into the next day. It was a thick, suffocating blanket. Every time I saw him, my stomach twisted into a knot of hope and dread. Look at me. Please, just look at me. But he never did. He was a stranger again. A beautiful, cruel stranger who held a piece of my heart in his careless hands. I retreated back into myself, but the walls of my fortress felt different now. They were thin, brittle. My solitude was no longer a comfort. It was just loneliness, sharp and aching. The silence was filled with the ghost of his voice, the memory of his touch. He He had shown me what connection could feel like, and then he had snatched it away. I decided it was for the best. I would forget it. I would go back to being the quiet observer. I would bury the memory of the storm and the kiss and the boy who saw me in the dark. It was safer that way. Safe was predictable. Safe was solitary. But it was a lie, and my stupid, traitorous heart knew it. It was 2 days after the project. 2 days of agonizing, suffocating silence. I was in my locker, swapping my physics textbook for calculus, my movements slow and robotic. I felt hollowed out, a walking shell. The hallway was a cacophony of noise and motion, but I was insulated from it by a thick layer of misery. Leo, his voice. It cut through the noise, sharp and clear. It hit me like a physical blow. I froze, my hand still inside my locker. I didn't want to turn around. I couldn't bear to see the pity, or, worse, the indifference on his face. Leo, please, there was something in his voice. Not pity, not indifference. Something else. Something that sounded a lot like fear. Slowly, I turned around. He was standing there, a few feet away. He was alone. His usual crowd of friends was nowhere in sight. He looked terrible. The shadows under his eyes were darker. He was chewing on his lower lip, a nervous habit I'd never seen before. The effortless confidence was gone, replaced by a raw, ragged uncertainty. He looked just as wrecked as I felt. Look, he started, his voice low, forcing me to lean in slightly to hear him over the hallway din about the other night. And the last 2 days. I'm sorry. I just stared at him, my throat too tight to speak. I'm an idiot, he continued, running a hand through his already messy hair. I freaked out. I woke up, and the sun was out, and it was all real. And I panicked. I've never done that before. Felt that. He looked down at his shoes, then back up at me, his gaze direct and pleading. It wasn't the storm, Leo. It wasn't a mistake. It was real. And it scared the hell out of me. My heart, which I thought had shattered into a million pieces, started to beat again, a slow, hopeful rhythm. I was a coward, he said, the words costing him. I didn't know what to do, what it meant. Well, my dad would say, or my friends. All that stupid stuff. So I ran. And I'm sorry. It was the worst thing I could have done. I hurt you, he saw it. He saw that he had hurt me. The validation of that, the simple acknowledgement, was like a soothing balm on a raw wound. I can't stop thinking about it, he confessed, his voice dropping to a whisper. About you. I don't want to pretend it didn't happen. Can we maybe not pretend it didn't happen? The world around us seemed to fade away. The lockers, the students, the noise. It was just him, his face etched with a desperate, vulnerable hope that mirrored my own. He was laying his cards on the table, just as he had in the dark. He was scared, but he was here. He came back. I finally found my voice. I don't want to pretend either, I whispered. A wave of relief washed over his face, so palpable it was almost visible. A small, shaky smile touched his lips. And then he did something that made my breath catch in my throat. Right there, in the middle of the crowded, noisy hallway, he reached out. He didn't grab me, didn't make a big show of it. He just laid his hand on my arm, his fingers warm and firm over the thin fabric of my sleeve. It wasn't a dramatic, movie-style gesture. It was a small, quiet, deliberate act. A public declaration. An anchor in the storm of my anxiety. It said, I'm here. I'm with you. I'm not hiding. Are you busy Friday night? He asked, his thumb tracing a small circle on my arm. My mind went completely blank. Friday night? I had no plans. I never had plans. No, I managed. Good, he said, his smile growing a little more confident. Me neither. Anymore. He squeezed my arm once more, a brief, reassuring pressure, and then he let go. He gave me a small nod, a promise hanging in the air between us, and turned and walked away, melting back into the stream of students. I stood there for a long moment, my arm tingling where he had touched it. The fortress was gone, and I didn't care. The world was suddenly vast and terrifying and full of breathtaking possibility. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. I was ready to step out into it. The weeks that followed were a quiet revelation. Friday night turned into Saturday afternoon. which bled into Sunday morning study sessions that had very little to do with studying. My small, predictable world didn't just expand. It was completely redrawn with Caleb at the center. We moved slowly, cautiously, learning the rhythms of this new, shared existence. The grand, dramatic gestures of our beginning, the storm, the confession, gave way to a series of small, domestic intimacies that were, in their own way, even more profound. There was the first time he came over not for a project, but just to be there. We watched a movie on my laptop, sitting on my bed, a careful foot of space between us. By the end, our shoulders were pressed together, his warmth a solid, comforting presence beside me. It felt more significant than the kiss. There was the morning I came downstairs to find him in my kitchen, already dressed after an early run, attempting to make coffee. He'd stayed over, sleeping on the couch after we'd talked late into the night. He looked completely out of place, and yet perfectly at home, his large frame navigating my small kitchen with a clumsy grace. He handed me a mug, and our fingers brushed, and this time, neither of us pulled away. This time, he just smiled. The garage, once a site of so much tension and anxiety, became our space. We'd sit out there on warm evenings, the big door rolled up to let in the smell of cut grass and dusk, talking for hours. He told me about the suffocating pressure of his future, and I told him about the quiet loneliness of my past. We filled in the blank spaces of each other's lives, the parts the rest of the world never saw. His friends were a hurdle I had dreaded, but Caleb handled it with a simple, unshakable matter-of-factness. He didn't make a big announcement. He just started bringing me along. To a pizza place after a game, to a bonfire by the lake. He'd sling an arm around my shoulder as naturally as breathing, daring anyone to say a word. Some stared, some whispered, but Caleb's unwavering confidence acted as a shield. He was marking his territory, and that territory included me. It was terrifying, and it was exhilarating. We fell into a routine that felt anything but waking up to his text messages, saving him a seat in the cafeteria, the feel of his hand finding mine under the table in the library. Each small act of connection was a brick in the foundation of this new, unbelievable thing we were building. The anxiety that had been my constant companion for years began to recede, replaced by a quiet hum of happiness, a feeling of being settled, of being known. One Saturday, we were working on his truck in the driveway. He was teaching me how to change the oil, my hands covered in grease. He was explaining something about the oil filter, leaning over me, his voice a low rumble by my ear. I stopped listening to the words and just listened to the sound of him, of his steady presence. I looked at him, really looked at him in the bright, unfiltered sunlight. The scar over his eyebrow, the smudge of grease on his cheek, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled down at me. The supernova I had once observed from a safe distance was now my sun, and I was happily caught in his orbit. The fear was gone. My life used to be a carefully constructed equation, a set of variables I could control to produce a predictable, safe result. Solitude plus observation plus émotionnelle distance égale survival. I had built my entire identity around that formula. Caleb was the variable I never saw coming. He was the disruption, the chaos factor, the plot twist that shattered my equation and proved all my calculations wrong. He forced his way into my ordered world, not with malice, but with the sheer, undeniable gravity of his existence. He was the storm that wrecked my fortress, and I loved him for it. He showed me that the walls I had built to keep the world out were also keeping me in. That vulnerability wasn't a weakness, but a bridge. That being seen, truly and completely seen by another person, wasn't a risk to be avoided, but the entire point. Standing there in my driveway, covered in grease, with Caleb's hand warm on my shoulder, I realized my life hadn't been dismantled. It had been completed. The random assignment in physics hadn't just given me a good grade on a project. It had given me the person who would teach me the chemistry of the human heart, a subject I had never even known I wanted to study. The quiet, orbiting moon had found its star, and the universe, once so vast and empty, finally felt like home.